Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. We cover 19 different promotions from all over the world. We're fastly approaching 5,000 fighter profiles for you to browse through and ensure you're getting as many direct links to past fights for those fighters so that you are as dusted up, fully studied and educated on these fighters before they step foot in the cage, whether you're utilizing it to handicap fights, to analyze fights, to break down fights, whether you're a coach looking to game plan for your opponent, or even a fighter looking to get more familiar with your opponent. The MMA Fight Archive has you fully covered. Check the link in the description below for a 7-day free trial and find out why we have over 110 subscribers on this platform and this service, taking full advantage of it. Again, 7-day free trial. Link for that in the description below. If you like studying up on fights, this will be your one-stop shop. And I am clearly the best in the world in terms of finding tape and footage on all these fighters. Check it out. You won't be disappointed. All right, this weekend, we're going to be talking about UFC 312, which goes down in Sydney, Australia, which often seems to be the hotbed for high-level middleweight fights in the UFC from way back in the day when I believe we had Luke Rockhold against Yoel Romero, Robert Whittaker defending the title a few times, obviously Robert Whittaker against Israel Adesanya having a couple fights down under, not to mention last time around coming up short against Dricus du Plessis, and now Dricus having successfully defended the title, having successfully defended it against Adesanya last year, comes back to Australia to defend it once again against the guy that he wanted off of in Sean Strickland back in January of 2024. It was a split decision victory for du Plessis, and now he wants to put a stamp on this rivalry by getting his hand raised once again. Not one, but two title fights are headlining this pay-per-view card, as in the co-main event, we have Zhang Weili looking to defend her strawweight title against a lot of people, or a fighter a lot of people believe should already be the champion of this division, Tatiana Suarez, who currently finds herself with an undefeated record and looks to be one of the scariest contenders in the division. Now, I quickly want to address the shitty performance that I had this past weekend at UFC Saudi Arabia. All those giving me flack in the comment section last week for some of the play or picks that I made. It was warranted. I was a little bit off my rocker, it seems, as I give some of these guys a little bit too much credit. The one that surprised me the most, or two of them that surprised me the most, and we'll talk about it right now in the Lock of the Night recap here, was Mike Davis. You know, I didn't get a lot of flack for that. I got some support in regards to that, but the fact that he went out there and looked completely flat, jumping guard a few times to open up the first round, very unlike him. And then in the second round, we finally saw him actually utilize his striking to get to his grappling, and that eventually opened up the grappling scenarios for him, but still a very flat performance from Davis. And even when the commentators in the second round were like, this is the worst we've ever seen Mike Davis look, I knew at that point in time that play was probably going to crash, and that ended up happening. The other one that kind of surprised me a little bit was the Thomas Peterson one. Now, I know that's the one that I was catching a lot of flack for, but for him to get knocked out by Shamil Gadzhiev after showing historically a very good durability and very good chin, you know, a lot of people are going to point to his fight against Waldo Cortez Acosta. He got knocked out in that fight, or lost by KO in that fight. That was a lot having to do with his bad gas tank, desperation takedowns, running on empty, being exhausted, and then Cortez Acosta being able to run away and with that matchup. But I thought Peterson improved his cardio over the last couple of fights, and I thought that we were going to see him take Gadzhiev into deep water here, and that's where I thought Peterson was going to come out on top. But to see him get clipped with that one big shot, did not see that coming. So credit to anybody that took the chalk on Gadzhiev there. And then the dog of the night play, the one shining spot on the card for me, Michael Venom Page goes out there and does that damn thing against Shara Magomedov, winning that fight, I believe, cleanly on the scorecards, all 30-27s, if I'm not mistaken. So very happy with that performance and to cash that underdog spot as well. So for the lock of the night, again, we go 0-2 this past weekend with Mike Davis really shit in the bed, and even my Octagon MMA lock of the night shit in the bed there as well. I was unable to watch the fight, so I'm not sure how it completely transpired, but I saw that he lost 30-27 all around. Not the way that I was expecting that fight to go down. So we now drop to 4-4 on the year for lock of the night plays at 50%. And then for our dog of the night plays, better than I was doing last year and even better than we're doing for the lock of the night plays. We are now 4-3 for a 57% hit rate. And we hope to keep the good times rolling for the dog of the night plays, which currently sits at a 43% ROI. But on the flip side, minus 26% ROI for the lock of the night plays. We got to flip that around and slowly but surely get back into the green. I do quickly want to plug the MMALOTN Patreon page. Make sure you guys check that out, as I'll have written breakdowns for all these cards. Obviously, we got LFA 201 coming down this Friday, going down in Brazil. I will have a Legacy Warriors podcast for that on Thursday evening, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Obviously, breaking down all LFA and Cage Warriors cards for you guys in 2025, so I got you covered there. And then we're back at it next week. I believe it's just the UFC next weekend. Let me just quickly confirm that here. Yeah, UFC, I guess it's Vegas 102 or 103 going down on February 15th. But again, a ton of other content coming out for February. KSW and Octagon as well, having another show at the ending of the month. And I drop all this great content on the MMALOTN Patreon page. Check the link in the description below. All right, before we get into these breakdowns, I do quickly want to address, again, shout out to the fans, the viewers, everybody that's been listening and watching to the show, giving your boy constructive criticism in terms of how to continue improving the quality of the show. And the one thing that I know I've had an issue with in the past and I'm still trying to work on, and again, somebody bringing it to light has allowed me to focus on it once again, is the speed in which I am speaking. And sometimes it might feel like I'm rattling things off and want to get to the end of my point every single time so I can get there quickly. But slowing things down a little bit will obviously be a lot easier for people to digest this information. And it doesn't feel like it's a sprint till the end there. It's more so a marathon. So I'm going to try to lower the cadence ever so slightly for this podcast, see how it goes. Hopefully we don't go into an hour and a half, 2 hour long podcast here. But if it's an easier listen on the ears for me to slow it down a little bit, I'd be happy to do that for you guys. And that's what I'm going to attempt to do. If I find myself quickly speeding up the cadence, I'm going to try to bring it back as quickly as I can just to make this a lot easier of a listening and viewing experience. All right, we got 13 fights to talk about for this UFC 312 card. Without further ado, let's get right into this bad boy. The first fight that we got up is going to be in the flyweight division, where we have South Korean prospect Hyun Sung Park coming in at minus 220, going up against Mongolian fighter Nyamjergal Tumendemberel, who comes in at plus 185. Now, Park is one of my top prospects to come out of Korea. I really believe that this is a guy that can get to the top of the flyweight division with the skill set that he brings to the table. His regional level of experience in terms of the guys that he's been fighting before getting onto the road to UFC and coming to the big promotion, a little bit skeptical, but at least he went out there and did what he needed to do to get his hand raised against those guys, finishing the majority of them as well. He's very quick. He's fast, has great counter-striking, and has a great grappling game that he can lean on as well to keep himself in safe positions and grind fights out or find the back of his opponents and eventually get the submission victory. Last time we saw him really pick apart Shannon Ross, getting that early dominant position on the mat, unable to get the finish there, but eventually in the second round was able to pick him apart and find that nasty body shot to put Ross away and follow up with some ground and pound to get the finish. I do believe Park is the next best thing to come out of South Korea, and I think he has all the skills to slowly work his way up the flyweight rankings, and he's going to have to go through a very aggressive and dangerous Tumendemberel to get to the next step. I believe Tumendemberel is a very aggressive fighter who suffered his first pro loss in his last matchup against Carlos Hernandez by split decision. That was a fight where Tumendemberel showcased a little bit better grappling defense than I expected him to. I had Carlos Hernandez as my lock of the night play for that matchup, and I was sweating it out. I can't lie, especially after Hernandez ended up getting dropped in the first round of that matchup. But luckily, Hernandez was able to get it together in the second and third rounds, getting his grappling going and out striking Tumendemberel in the third round of that matchup. Tumendemberel is a little bit of aggressive and wild striker, often falling over his feet when he throws that power right hand. A lot of them usually hooks or uppercuts that he's trying to send guys up to heaven with, it seems like. But his grappling defense slowly improving. Very impressed with his ability to throw up arm bars when he needs to. But he often gives up his back and spends a little bit too much time defending and trying to get back to a dominant position, or at least back to his feet. He's going up against Park here, like I said, and I think this is a very good stylistic matchup for Park. Although there is the Hail Mary KO possibility for the Mongolian fighter, I expect Park to traverse this fight perfectly, utilize his speed advantage to get in and out of the pocket without eating too much damage in return, counter-striking effectively by making Tumendemberel pay for some of his wild and erratic striking approaches. And then thirdly, I think he can get to his grappling when he finds the openings, eventually getting the back of Tumendemberel, and I think he'll eventually be able to get that rear naked choke. If he can get a dominant enough position where he gets Tumendemberel in the open cage, open space, gets the back, and does not allow Tumendemberel to use the wall or the cage to work back to his feet, he should be able to find that dominant position on the back and sink in that rear naked choke and get the submission here. So I'm going to go with the South Korean fighter here to win this fight by submission. Next up, we got Salkilld coming in at minus 570, going up against Indian fighter Jubli, who comes in at plus 420. Now, starting off on the Salkilld side, who earned his contract to the UFC this past season on the Contender series, where he went up against a very game Gage Young and came out on top by decision that night. Salkilld is a vicious Muay Thai striker who does a great job in terms of putting combinations together, ending them with kicks, battering the lead legs of his opponents, utilizing elbows and knees when he gets inside the Muay Thai clinch, but also has a BJJ black belt that he can lean on if that's where he wants to take fights and try to expose opponents there. He had a decent strength of schedule on the regional scene, but I don't rate the Australian regional scene that highly, but he went out there, did the damn thing. Only lost his first professional fight, but has now rattled off 7 straight victories, none more important than the one that he won last time to earn his way to the biggest stage in the world. Now he's going up against Jubli, who suffered his first professional loss last time around against Mike Breeden back in October of 2023, where he ended up coming up short in the third round of that matchup. Now all 3 judges had it 20 to 18 going into the third round, but it seemed like about 4 minutes into that second round, Jubli was really starting to slow down, and it seemed like the constant forward pressure of Breeden started to catch up to him. Then Jubli eventually started to slow down even more in the third round, and Breeden was clearly sensing it, and he continued to put that pressure and land big shots on Jubli, which eventually saw Jubli crumble and allow Breeden to get that knockout victory win with a beautiful right hook. Jubli has showcased solid skills all around. He's a good technical striker, or at least an average technical striker. Also utilizes BJJ very well on the regional scene, but a lot of that had to do with the inexperience of the opponents that he was fighting on the regional scene, which allowed him to get to the point to fight in the road to UFC, won that split decision against Kyung Pyo Kim, and then he was able to go out there and finish Jekka Seregi. Again, he's a solid all-around fighter, but I just don't know if he has what it takes to really get to the next level in the UFC. And unfortunately for him, he goes from being a minus 250 favorite in his last matchup to now finding himself at plus 420 against a nasty Australian prospect. I think Salkilld is the better mixed martial artist in all aspects of this matchup. I expect him to dictate the pace, which is often where Jubli ends up becoming uncomfortable when he's not the one in control of the pace, moving forward and landing his shots. I think Salkilld is the faster and cleaner striker here, so he'll be able to make Jubli pay on one of those simple basic 1-2 shots that he likes to throw out there. But I think we'll eventually see Salkilld look to get this fight to the ground and utilize his BJJ advantage to really put Jubli through the ringer and open up a submission victory for himself. So I do believe the Australian fighter will win this matchup. Minus 570, a little bit wild and wide for my liking. I think a lot of that has to do with people clowning on Jubli because of the way that he lost, losing to a guy that was barking at him at the last half of that matchup. But I think Salkilld should be the better fighter overall here, and he should go out there and eventually find the submission, which is probably where I'll end up putting my stake for this matchup. Next up, Jonathan Micallef coming in at plus 210, going up against Kevin Jousset, who comes in at minus 250. Now, Jonathan Micallef is coming off the Contender series where he was able to pick up a victory over Muhammad Ado by submission. It was a very grueling matchup between the two guys. A lot of jostling for position in the cage, clinch, in the grappling, a few takedown attempts from both guys. But eventually, it was Jonathan Micallef who was able to get that triangle choke and putting Muhammad Ado out completely cold. And that is how he was able to get his hand raised and get that contract to the UFC. Now, that's a 2-fight winning streak now for Micallef, who lost his, I believe it was Hex Fighting Championship title back in March of 2024. That was a matchup where he was desperation wrestling, as we normally have come to know from his physical style that he brings to the table. And he eventually ran out of gas going in to that fourth round, which is where his opponent was able to get that finish, that TKO ground and pound finish, and get that victory over Micallef. But Micallef, still very young, 25 years old, and does a great job in terms of just bodying opponents, putting them in uncomfortable positions and dragging them to the ground where he's usually able to control them or eventually find submissions or ground and pound finishes. Unfortunately for him, he's being put up against Kevin Jousset, who is coming off his first UFC loss last time around, where he came up short against Brian Battle. That was a matchup where Jousset did a great job in terms of utilizing his judo background to stop the takedown attempts of Brian Battle, who was continuously looking to get him to the ground and just overwhelm him in the clinch. One judge actually scored that round for Jousset, even though he was on the defensive for the most of that round. But he did a great job in terms of staying upright and just getting off on his damage and making Battle pay for the takedown attempts that he was trying. But unfortunately for Jousset, he ended up coming up short in the second round as Battle sensed that Jousset was starting to slow down, and he picked up the volume, picked up the pace, and eventually got the TKO finish over Jousset. Now, Jousset trains out of City Kickboxing alongside the likes of Israel Adesanya, Carlos Alberg, and the rest of those guys down there. So you can see where that kickboxing comes into play, but his first martial art was actually judo, and you can see that on display in some of his fights where he utilizes a lot of trips and throws and has decent control against his opponents from that top position. But I think at his best, he is a fighter that can dictate the pace with his striking, utilizing a lot of calf kicks to slow opponents down, letting his hands go after those shots where he can land some damage. And even though he's not a huge knockout threat, he still does a great job in terms of putting points on the board, getting ahead of his opponents, and winning on the scorecards. And I expect him to have to utilize that judo background here against Jonathan Micallef as he looks to keep this fight standing. And then from there, beat him up on the feet, batter that lead leg, hopefully slow Micallef down and stop those takedown attempts, or at least stop the attempts of continuously coming at him, and eventually just pick him apart in the striking realm and do what he does best there. I do like Jousset. I don't mind him at this minus 250 line. I think he's worth of a little bit of a parlay piece here. Nothing too crazy. Don't put all your eggs in his basket, but I do think this is a matchup where we can see his takedown defense hold up once again, and then from there pick apart Micallef and win this fight on the scorecards. The other spot in this matchup that has caught my eye is the over 2.5 at minus 155. I think we'll see a lot of this fight be eaten up in the clinch, where Micallef is going to be working very hard to try to get this fight to the ground. As long as he doesn't hit this crazy cardio dump, I expect Jousset to just pitter-patter his way to a decision victory here. Or even if Micallef ends up coming out on the winning end here, it likely comes by decision where he's just getting a lot of control time and keeping Jousset pinned against the cage or pinned on the mat if he can actually get him to the ground. But I do like Jousset here. I think we'll see him stop the takedowns, pick apart Micallef, and win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, lightweights going at it here as we have Rongzhu coming in at plus 170, going up against Cody Steele. Sorry, fumbled my words there a little bit. Cody Steele coming in at minus 200. Now we'll start off on the Rongzhu side of things here, who's coming off of a doctor stoppage loss to Chris Padilla last time around. And unfortunately for him, that was the first fight for Rongzhu back in the UFC after getting cut back in 2022 after a loss to Ignacio Bahamondes. It wasn't just because of that loss, but a lot of it had to do with him constantly missing weight, which is something he seems to finally have under control. Now, I think that we'll see Rongzhu showcase his striking prowess, which has made him successful, and which is why he has 25 victories out of his 31 fights, and he's going to be turning 25 next month. So to have 31 fights of experience, even before turning 25, is a crazy feat for any fighter, and Rongzhu continues to show that he is becoming a better fighter each time out. Now, that loss against Chris Padilla was a competitive striking battle between both guys where I thought the momentum was starting to shift in Rongzhu's favor until he got hit with a very nasty elbow that landed on the eye socket of Rongzhu and immediately swelled it shut. You could see it puff up immediately, and there was no doubt that fight was going to end up being stopped. Now that he's fully healed, ready to go again, I think he is ready to showcase his striking prowess once again, as well as his defensive grappling improvements that we've been seeing as of late, which allows him to keep fights in the striking realm where he often has an advantage over his opponents. Now he's going up against Cody Steele, who is an undefeated 7-0 prospect who earned his contract to the Contender Series this past season by putting away Chasen Blair with a nasty body shot finish. Now, you have to remember, Chasen Blair came in on short notice, I believe a week or two after he had fought for Cage Warriors, taking the short notice opportunity against Cody Steele, and still ended up coming up short. Now, Cody Steele is a guy that comes from a decorated BJJ background where he's done a great job in terms of performing for grappling competitions, but now translating it to the MMA world. Now, the funny part is the majority of his wins have actually come by knockout. 5 of his 7 wins have come by finish, with 4 of them being by knockout and only 1 by submission, showcasing that he is growing in confidence with his hands, blitzing the pocket against his opponents, landing big strikes, and looking to put them away in that fashion. His cardio seems to be on point, and he's faced some relatively decent competition during his come up with Fury FC and training at Syndicate. We know he's getting a little bit more tailored training compared to just being a part of some of these bigger super gyms where they have to kind of spread it out amongst all the competitors that they have in their stable. At 29 years old, I think Steele is nearing his prime, but the lack of MMA experience he has here, going up against a guy that has 31 MMA fights, I think it's going to come to light that maybe this is too big of a step up for a prospect like Cody Steele. I think highly of Steele. I think he could turn out to be a damn good prospect. But I think he's going to eventually come up short against a guy like Rongzhu, who should be able to stop most of the grappling onslaught that Cody Steele might be looking to implement here. And then from there, I think Rongzhu is the superior striker. And I think Steele will slowly start to figure that out, and that will cause him to start slowing down. And I think that will see him slowly start to break as Rongzhu starts landing more combinations and more output altogether. So I do like the plus money that we're getting here on Rongzhu. I think this is a new version that we're getting of him. And as long as he doesn't eat a clean elbow to the eye socket once again, I think we'll see him actually touch up Cody Steele and actually win this fight on the scorecards. So a plus 170, give me Rongzhu as an underdog. Next up, bantamweights going out of here. UFC newcomers as well, as we have Colby Thicknesse coming in at plus 295, taking on the brother of featherweight champion Ilia Topuria, Alexandre Topuria, who comes in at minus 370. Now, originally, this was supposed to be Cody Haddon, who had just earned his contract to the UFC through the Contender Series this past season. Unfortunately, he's forced to pull out, and in steps Alexander Volkanovski's training partner, Colby Thicknesse. So there's a little bit of an underlying storyline in going into this matchup, even though both of these guys are making their UFC debuts. Now, we'll start off on the Thicknesse side, who had a solid 8-1 record as an amateur, but now finds himself as a 7-0 pro. His level of competition, a little bit sketchy, specifically in his last 3 matchups where he's been able to quickly take opponents to the ground, smash them from that top position, either finding the submission or ground and pound finish. But more often than not, we see Thicknesse actually utilizing a mobile striking approach to touch up opponents with output from distance, using a lot of kicks, cutting a lot of angles, trying to close the distance with some combinations, and then if he needs to, he'll go to his grappling. But I think he went to his grappling more so in his recent fights because of that gap in skill that he felt over his opponents. He's a solid fighter, may turn into a decent prospect in the UFC roster, but unfortunately for him, the UFC is doing him no favors by putting him against a guy like Alexander Topuria, who is just, he may not be his brother, but he might have good enough potential to potentially not eclipse his brother, but come close to where his brother has gotten. Now, Topuria started his career 2-1 back in 2015 as a 19-year-old, and then he ended up taking off 6 years away from competition, coming back in 2021, I believe it was, and from there he picked up a victory in 2021, 2022, 2023, smashing his competition, showing shades of Ilya as well. He walks his opponents down, throwing big shots, big winging hooks, a lot of power, a lot of speed behind those. But if he doesn't find that knockout on the feet, he quickly gets them to the ground and utilizes a superior grappling approach to really just make it hell for his opponents from that top position. Now, in this matchup, it's kind of hard to be truly confident on the Topuria side at minus 370, considering this is going to be the toughest opponent he's faced to date. Now, the lone loss on Topuria's career came back in 2015, where he utilized a solid grappling approach for about a round and a half before it seemed like his gas tank was completely blown and his opponent, who was clearly on all the roids, was able to reverse the position and get that ground and pound victory over Topuria. I think Topuria is much better than he was 10 years ago, as you would completely expect. And I'm sure he was training the entire time, that 6 years that he was off. And I think that we are seeing those improvements in his recent fights, but now he gets to show it on a bigger stage. And I think that this is the perfect opponent for him to go out there and showcase those skills. The question remains, can he go 15 minutes without having a cardio dump like he had in his lone defeat? I believe he has improved that, and I think that he won't showcase that. But for me, as being somebody that wants to, turn every stone, I want to see Topuria have to go 15 minutes before I'm willing to chalk up that minus 370 line on him and just assume that he's going to be a free square. I believe he gets the knockout here, so we'll see what that prop is once it ends up dropping. I think that might be the better way to go about it. I think he'll be able to land effectively and powerfully on Thicknesse here, leading to a knockout victory. I think it'll be a spectacular knockout for him to start off his UFC career. But from a percentages perspective, Thicknesse might be able to be a little bit slimy. His durability might hold up. But I think Topuria eventually corners him, catches him, and puts him away here. So give me Topuria and Topuria by knockout. Next up, in the women's flyweight division, we got Cong coming in at minus 450, looking to get back to her winning ways as she goes up against Brasil, who comes in at plus 350. Now we'll start off on the Cong side, who's been very active. This is going to be her fourth UFC fight in 9 months, as well as her seventh fight in 18 months. She just continuously gets in the cage, stays active, tries to make up for lost time in terms of, initially starting as a kickboxer and coming to the UFC as a 31-year-old. She seems to have some of those skills, but we saw her get a little bit humbled last time around as she suffered her first MMA loss as a pro in her seventh professional fight. Now she came in as a minus 1,000 favorite, I believe it was, against Gabriela Fernandez, and she was looking good for about a round and a half before Fernandez finally landed that big shot that caught Wang off guard, and from there she was able to quickly jump on the back of Wang and put her out cold with a rear naked choke. Now, I don't think that means that Wang has bad grappling defense. I think that was more so her just, getting caught with a big shot, having her brain rattled and trying to get her wits back about her, And then before she knew it, Fernandez was on her back and she was in a choke and she went out cold. So I think that Wang has shown solid defensive grappling up to that point. When she is not rocked, she can stop takedowns, she can keep fights standing, and she can batter opponents with the kickboxing advantage she often has when she steps foot in the cage. She's 32 years old. I think she can still turn things around and get back to her winning ways and maybe even start making a march into the rankings and top 10, top 5. She just needs to be a little bit more disciplined. She knows that she's human now. She knows she can be hurt, so we might see a little bit more of a conservative approach from her moving forward as she goes up and fights these other fighters who are going to be looking to expose that flaw once again. Now, on the Bruna Brasil side, this is a fighter that I just can't seem to get right. I took her as a lock of the night play against Denise Gomez. She gives us the shittiest performance we've ever seen from her. She follows that up with a victory over Shauna Bannon. I believe I predicted Bannon to win that matchup, but no action there. Loma Lukbunmi, I took a plus 200 shot on Bruna Brasil, and she goes out there and shits the bed against Loma Lukbunmi. And then last time around, no action on the Molly McCann fight, but I did predict McCann to win that, but that was the best version of Brasil we'd seen in the UFC up until that point. You know, that was a calm, cool, collected version of Brasil, countering effectively, getting to her grappling whenever the opportunity showed itself. A lot of it was when McCann was looking for takedowns, we would see Brasil reverse those positions, get the better of those positions, and then even in the third round, we saw her go to it herself and have some success there. Maybe some of that success could be pointed to the Fighting Nerds, which is a camp she joined up with recently, and we know the success that those guys are having. If they can bring that analytical mindset to Brasil into these matchups, she might be able to exaggerate her success in the UFC. She's great physically. You know, she's strong, she's fast, she has some good pop on her shots. Her grappling is not that bad either, but it really comes down to if she can execute inside the cage. Now, in this matchup against Wang Cong, if Brasil goes out there and tries to get right to her grappling, I don't think it will work out for her. I think we'll see Wang do a great job in terms of keeping this fight upright, where she can really touch up Brasil from distance. Obviously, Wang is going to have to be very cognizant of the counters that are coming back her way. But if she can just be very disciplined, you know, stay out of the way of the counters that are coming her way and just really stick with the basics of her striking approach, I think she can really touch up Brasil here and have a good performance doing so. With that said, minus 450 is just too wide to be comfortable betting that type of chalk, especially if Brasil has unlocked another version of herself that we are now slowly starting to see, which started with the Molly McCann fight. So I'm still going to pick Wang, but no way would I ever suggest taking her at minus 450. But I think we'll see Wang go out there, touch her up, stay safe, stay disciplined, get back in the win column, and get her hand raised on the scorecards. We have a lightweight banger on tap as we have Tom Nolan coming in at plus 115, going up against Vyacheslav Borshchev, who comes in at minus 135. Now we'll start off on Tom Nolan here, who obviously has home field advantage and looking to build upon his 2 victories over Victor Martinez and Alex Reyes. The last time against Alex Reyes, I think a lot of people were surprised that he had to go the full 15 minutes to end up winning that matchup. But he still got it done and showcased that he can go 15 minutes if he needs to in those types of matchups. I believe Reyes did have a little bit of success in that fight, but Nolan eventually got it together and really touched up Reyes from distance and even stopped some of the takedowns that were coming his way. And that's where a lot of the time on the clock was eaten up, with Reyes pushing Nolan against the cage and trying to get him to the ground. He had some decent success in the first round by getting Nolan's back, but Nolan showcased solid submission defense and grappling defense, staying out of too many bad dominant positions for Reyes, and from there picking him apart and touching him up on the feet. Nolan, obviously nasty striker with 5 of his 8 wins coming by knockout, but a lot of that has to do with his size, speed, and power that he brings to the lightweight division as a 6'3" fighter with a 73-inch reach. We saw that on full display on his Contender Series matchup, where he knocked out Bogdan Grad viciously because of the power and speed advantage he had in that matchup. he is still a guy that we need to like pump our brakes a little bit on him. His striking defense leaves a lot to be desired. Obviously, we saw Nicholas Mota take full advantage of that, pulling off the upset and knocking him out. Followed that up with the Victor Martinez fight, where Martinez hurt Nolan very badly early, but eventually Nolan was able to get his wits back about him and eventually find the finish himself. So until Nolan can really start to dust up that striking defense and not just pull his head back and hoping that his reach and height advantage is enough for him to stay safe against a lot of these strikers, you have to be worried about what he brings to the table. And unfortunately for him, he's going up against a very decorated kickboxer and pretty much a UFC veteran at this point in Vyacheslav Borshchev, who's coming off of a decision victory over James Lontop last time around. Now, the actual result reads split decision win for Borshchev, but I think it's kind of unanimously agreed upon that Borshchev clearly won rounds 1 and 2 in that fight and deserved to get his hand raised. His durability, high level. His striking, high level. I love his ability to mix up his combinations and dig to the body of his opponents and look to break them there before he eventually goes back up to the head and tries to knock them out. Another aspect of Borshchev's game that we need to give him credit for is his defensive grappling. We saw it fully on display against Chase Hooper in a fight that he got completely dominated in, but he did a great job in terms of staying out of the submissions. Now, he lost by submission in that matchup, but it was a controversial stoppage as he did not tap, nor was he put to sleep. But considering how that fight was going, he's probably going to lose it anyways. But if Borshchev can successfully keep fights in the striking realm, it's clear he's going to be very tough to deal with for a lot of fighters. And I think that's going to be the case here for Tom Nolan this weekend as we get both strikers going head to head. Now, if the UFC continues to give Borshchev these types of matchup, I could see him having a long career with the promotion, putting on entertaining matchups, sprinkling in wins and losses here and there, but more often than not, providing fight of the night type performances. And I expect that to happen here once again against Tom Nolan, who will be more than glad to throw down in the pocket with Borshchev. There will be a little bit of chess and checkers going on in this matchup, but I think Borshchev's advantages, technically speaking, will allow him to get the better of Nolan in this spot. Now, Borshchev will be at a 4-inch height disadvantage as well as a 4-inch reach disadvantage, but I don't think it's something that he has too much to worry about. As we know, Nolan has an issue with keeping his head on the center line at times, and I think Borshchev will look to take advantage of that by starting with the body and working his way up to the head, which is where Nolan will eventually leave an opening for Borshchev to get the knockout victory. So, close odds here. Minus 135 for Borshchev. I have to lean with him here, and I think this is a great spot to take a shot on him. Obviously, the youth, speed, and power of Nolan could come and haunt Borshchev, but for the most part, Borshchev has shown a solid chin. And if he can hold up here against Nolan, that allows him to counter him. From there, I think we'll see Borshchev eventually get that knockout and get his hand raised. All right, moving down to the featherweight division now. We got Jack Jenkins coming in at plus 190, taking on Brazilian Gabriel Santos, who comes in at minus 225. Now, starting off on the Jack Jenkins side of things, who had a very dominant performance against Herbert Burns last time around, chipping away at the lead leg, shutting down the grappling of Burns, and eventually putting him away in the opening minute of round 3. Jenkins is a very educated fighter in terms of his fight IQ, does a great job in terms of implementing his striking approach, utilizing his calf kicks to open up the rest of his offense, and even has a decent grappling game that he can lean on if he feels he has an advantage in that realm. He's one of my favorite prospects to come out of that region, but I don't know if he's going to be able to achieve the level of success that I originally thought he would be able to. Although his lone UFC loss came to Chepe Mariscal in a matchup where he actually injured himself and was forced to tap out due to breaking his arm, if I'm not mistaken, there are still some holes in his game that I think a fighter that Gabriel Santos might be able to exploit. Now, starting off on the Santos, or heading over to the Santos side of things, I believe his 0-2 start with the promotion is not a great representation of what his skill set actually is and how much success he could potentially have at this level in the game. And I think he showed that off last time around as he just absolutely mopped the floor with Ija, winning that fight on the scorecards and pretty much not losing any second of that fight. We saw him stick to his striking approach, but even get to some of his grappling. But for the most part, he's picking Ija apart on the feet, utilizing nasty kicks, good straight shots down the pipe, good speed advantage, good damage when he got it to the ground, utilized nasty elbows to cut up the Chinese fighter, and eventually get his hand raised on the scorecards there. I did have Santos as my lock of the night play against David Onama 2 fights back, and that was a spot I felt very confident about, as I thought Santos would be able to pick apart David Onama, maybe get this fight to the ground and have some success there. But it seemed like he hit some sort of cardio wall. Maybe it was a big shot that Onama landed that slowed down Santos. And then from there, Onama followed up with some more big shots and eventually got Santos out of there. But I think that this would be a great spot for Santos to showcase that he is one of the better fighters in this featherweight division. I think he's the faster and more dangerous striker, which will cause Jenkins a lot of problems. And I think Santos will do a great job with shutting down the calf kicking game of Jack Jenkins. And I think from there, that will let Santos's hands go. The hand speed will be superior to Jack Jenkins. I think if Jenkins looks to get this to the ground, he's going to have a lot to deal with Santos utilizing solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, good get-ups, creating scrambles. And as long as Santos does not hit some cardio wall like he did against David Onama, I think he'll be able to get to his spots, land the better damage, and eventually come out on the winning end by decision here. All right, moving over to the welterweight division, and I believe this is the first fight on the main card of this pay-per-view event, and it goes down in the welterweight division, where we got Jake Matthews coming in at minus 230, going up against Francisco Prado, who comes in at plus 195. Now, start off on the Jake Matthews side of things, who has been exchanging wins and losses since COVID. Most recently coming off a decision victory over Phil Rowe in a fight where he had to dig down deep after having a very slow start to that fight in the first round. But in the second round, had the superior strikes, was crashed in the pocket, effectively landing bigger, more eye-catching shots than what Phil Rowe was doing. And then in the third round, getting to his grappling. And even though he got reversed quickly after getting the takedown, he eventually found a reversal of his own and was able to grind out Phil Rowe to win that fight on the scorecards. It's crazy to think that Jake Matthews is still only 30 years old, considering he's been with the promotion for 10, 11 years at this point in time and continues to grow in front of our eyes. I think we've seen his ceiling at this point in time, that he might not be able to get past the likes of guys like Michael Morales, and even heavy punchers like Matthew Summelsberger could give him issues. But I think if he tapped back into what made him successful initially with his wrestling, he might be able to find more success and actually continue moving up the welterweight ladder and maybe finding himself in some high profile spots. But I think his willingness to just let his striking go a little bit more has caused him some issues and caused some of his losses in recent years. But his wrestling has really bailed him out of some bad spots against most opponents. And I think that's where he can really shine if he leans on that side of his game once again. Now, he might have to do that here as he goes up against Argentinian Francisco Prado, who's looking to bounce back after losing by decision to Daniel Zellhuber last time around. Now, he had a glimpse of success in that first round, hurting Zellhuber very badly, but was unable to overcome the technical advantages that the Mexican fighter had over him in the second and third rounds, as Zellhuber stuck him from distance and went on to win that fight on the scorecards. Prado is now 1-2 with the promotion, and he's actually changed camps. He went from training with the Goat Shed camp and now finds himself at American Top Team, but also moving up a weight class to 170 pounds, where he feels he can perform at his best. He throws with a lot of power. His grappling defense is slowly improving, but those are aspects of his game that I think we're going to have to see first before we really see if he can actually get to the next level or not. We have to remember also, he's 22 years old. So that will be, a lot for a fighter like him to overcome, especially against a guy like Jake Matthews, who's been in the UFC since Prado was 10 or 11 years old. So in this matchup, If Prado can convince Matthews to exchange in the pocket with him, that's where Prado's going to find success. Prado by knockout would probably be the way to go if you're going on the Prado side. That would be a tough thing to overcome because Matthews has never been knocked out. There was that fight against Matthews Samuelsberger where he got dropped 3 times but still did not get finished. But Prado might have the speed and power to change that. That's why I think we'll see Matthews put together a complete game here and look to get Prado to the ground and try to grind him out from that top position. It might get a little bit sweaty later on in this matchup, which is why my confidence level is not all that high, but I have to go with the veteran Jake Matthews here, and I think we see a classic Matthews grind out here and really putting it on the youngster to win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, light heavyweights going at it here as we have Jimmy the Brute Crute coming in at plus 135, going up against Rodolfo Bellato, who comes in at minus 155. Now starting off on the Jimmy Crute side of things, who seemingly retired after getting choked out by Alonzo Menafield back in July 2023. If you guys remember, that was a spot where he lost the first round, I believe. The second round got caught in a front choke by Menafield and then eventually was forced to tap in that matchup and then right away ripped his gloves off and it looked like he was ready to retire at that point. And I think that scenario, that whole moment is a perfect encapsulation of the roller coaster emotions that Jimmy Crute goes through throughout his career. From his training camps to his fights to in between fights. Like, this guy has talked about changing things up a ton before several of his past fights. And once again, he's saying it again. Now he's leaning on Christianity, saying, believing in God and all that is really changing his mindset. And he believes it will help him perform in the cage a lot better. And who's to say? We'll find out this weekend if that change is actually going to help him out. But he is a guy that normally relies on his grappling. I believe, is a BJJ black belt, but as you can see, getting choked out by a guy like Alonzo Menafield, there are clearly levels, right? You should be able to get out of those spots. But again, Menafield, very strong, very imposing. Maybe Crute just found himself in a bad spot and kind of panicked and was forced to tap there. In his striking, he likes to just provide a lot of pressure to make up for some of the shortcomings that are in his technical striking game so that he can eventually change levels and look to get opponents to the ground and get to his aggressive jiu-jitsu game from there. But he is 0-3-1 in his last 4 fights, showcasing that he may not have what it takes to be successful at this level. He's only 28 years old still, obviously coming off a bit of a lengthy layoff. He might have been able to make the changes to get to that next level. But I think he's going to come up short here against a guy in Rodolfo Bellato, who seems to be making all the correct moves and improvements to get to the next level himself. Now, he originally came up short on his Contender Series shot in 2023 by getting knocked out by Vitor Petrino. He went back to the regional scene, cleaned up a few things, won 2 straight fights, got another shot on the Contender Series, and made good against a very aggressive wrestler in Murtaza Taha, keeping this fight standing, working him down, and eventually finding a finish in that fight. That earned him his contract to the UFC and an eventual matchup with Ihor Potieria in a fight where Bellator was struggling in the striking realm, nearly got finished, but showcased solid fight IQ by constantly working and showing the referee that he was in that matchup and did not need to have that fight stopped. And that allowed him to eventually work back to his feet, put the pressure on a gassed Ihor Potieria, and eventually get him out of there and win that fight by TKO. Bellator has actually been taking gigs with the LFA Brazil commentary team, and you can tell that similar to what Caio Bahayo has shown with his commentary, he's really analyzing the game from a different perspective, and I think that could continue to help him become a better fighter, especially with him only being 29 years old. I think Bellato is the superior striker here compared to Crute, and I think Bellato has good enough takedown defense that he should be able to keep this fight upright and keep Crute in spots that will keep Crute uncomfortable. And I think that's where we're going to see Bellato start to pull away in this matchup. I think it's going to be a high-paced matchup. I think there's going to be a lot of violence. I think the under is live in this. The fight doesn't go to decision is live in this matchup. But with a little bit of confidence, I'm going to go on the Bellator side. With him keeping this fight standing, I expect him to really butcher and pick apart Jimmy Crute, who just leaves far too many openings in the striking realm. Look for Crute to utilize his desperation wrestling, but I don't think it will come to fruition for him here as Bellato starts chipping away at him and eventually putting him away in the second or third round. Give me Bellato via KO. All right, moving over to the heavyweight division now. We have Justin Tafa coming in at plus 115, going up against UFC newcomer Teixeira, who comes in at minus 135. Now we'll start off on the Justin Tafa side, who got completely grinded out by Carl Williams last time around, where Tafa had shown a 100% takedown defense rate going in to the fight against Carl Williams. Unfortunately for him, Williams was able to land 7 takedowns, and that now brings Tafa's takedown defense to 50%. We know what Tafa's all about. Power, slow, plodding, moving forward, stalking his opponents, looking to land some combinations, but more importantly, looking to knock his opponents out clean. It's just that doesn't work against fighters that are a little bit more agile on their feet or guys that are good enough wrestlers to keep him on his back, because he just doesn't seem to know how to get up off of his back in certain moments. I've never been that big on Tafa. He's 31 years old. Obviously, he has crazy knockout power, but a lot of question marks in terms of dealing with more complete mixed martial artists. Now he's going up against a towering Teixeira, standing at 6'7" with an 83-inch reach, only 25 years old. This BJJ black belt has finished, I believe, every single one of his opponents on the regional scene in the first round, earned his shot on the Contender series, made true on that as well, and now finds himself inside the UFC. One of his main training partners and coaches is former UFC fighter Lucas Martins, who didn't have the greatest run with the promotion. I think he went 500 and then eventually got released. But Teixeira seems to have some promise. But there is some greenness and rawness to his game still that could make him a bit of a liability against some of the better fighters and more tenured fighters on the roster. Teixeira, again, BJJ black belt, he could often look to get fights to the ground, but in the majority of his fights, we've been seeing him touch up his opponents and eventually put them away with the big power that he brings to the table. But that also leaves openings for other opponents to touch him up on the feet. Even his last opponent, Arthur Lopez, was able to get off on some good shots, but not land the brunt of his shots, which eventually allowed Teixeira to eventually counter him and have more success in the striking realm. That's not going to work as much against the more talented strikers that are on the UFC roster. And Tafa is definitely one of those guys. Even though Tafa will be at a 7-inch height and a 9-inch reach disadvantage, I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to explode into the pocket and land on the giant here to crumple him and bring him down. If I was Teixeira, I would look to get this fight to the ground ASAP. I think he has the strength. I think he has the grappling. And then from there, obviously, he's going to be very difficult for Tafa to deal with from that top position. And I think from there, we'll see Teixeira either get off on some ground and pound or eventually find a submission and get the victory that way as well. Minus 135 is not a line I would want to pay on somebody getting into the UFC and finally fighting someone that will provide legit resistance and could potentially find the chin of Teixeira as well. I'm going to wait to see what fight week ends up looking like, if some action comes in on the UFC veteran here to bring the UFC newcomer to underdog territory, and that's the spot where I'll eventually look to maybe take on Teixeira here. I'd also like to see Teixeira's submission line. If it's something crazy, it might be worth a little bit of a poke, because I think he'll be looking to get this fight to the ground and eventually find a submission or a finish from there, no matter how. Just as we saw last week with Terrence McKinney, when there is a big enough grappling edge, submission and KO is a bit of a toss-up. But I believe with the BJJ background of Teixeira, he might be looking for a submission instead. Who knows whether Tafa can be submitted or not. But if somebody is able to do it, a big guy like Teixeira might be able to get it done. So my official prediction for this matchup will be Teixeira by submission. But again, got to be cautious considering some of the striking defense issues we've seen from him in the past. All right, that brings us to our first of 2 title fights on the card. First up, women's strawweights going at it here, as we have champion Weili coming in at plus 105, going up against Tatiana Suarez, who comes in at minus 125. Now start off on the Weili side, who is actually close to minus 200 when the line opened on this matchup, but now finds herself as the slight underdog. The 35-year-old is on a 4-fight winning streak and successfully has defended her title twice since winning it for the second time, most recently grinding out Xiaonan Yan at UFC 300 and winning that fight on the scorecards. She's controlling the majority of that fight outside of round 3, where it seemed like she was running out of gas and her opponent was starting to pull away. But then we saw the championship medal of Weili come through as she was able to get back to her grappling in rounds 4 and 5 and keep Yan on the mat, grinding her out. Now, normally, Weili is a great striker where she showcases great combinations, fast twitch muscle, decent power, stinging power, but just as is shown in the Yan fight, it depends on the stylistic clash that she has to figure out which approach she's going to be looking to use. So why not against a striker like Yan? Go to the wrestling. You've clearly been working on that throughout your career, and that has allowed her to get her hand raised. In the past one, it wasn't that great. Like when she fought Rose Namajunas the second time, she felt the bad part of that when she could not defend those takedowns and ended up getting grinded out by Namajunas that night. But now with a improved grappling game, we can see her lean on that against dangerous strikers like she did against Amanda Lemos and like she did against Xiaonan Yan. But at 35, you have to start wondering at what time are you going to start to show the decline and showcase that the new generation or the rising contenders are ready to take over. We know that crazy statistic about at least the men's champions at 170 pounds or lower are not able to defend the title past 35 years old. Will it pertain to women? Well, Weili will have a very tough test to prove against that fact as she goes up against the relentless wrestling approach of Tatiana Suarez. Now, Suarez has had her own challenges outside of the octagon in terms of remaining active and trying to get as much action as she can. Before her return in February of 2023, she had been out of action since June of 2019. She managed to get 2 fights in 2023, finishing both of those matchups in the second round by guillotine, showcasing that the work that she's doing with her significant other, Patchy Mix, is really working out for her with her submission game. We already knew she was a tremendous wrestler, but to round out that grappling game by getting to her submissions and forcing opponents to tap out, that makes her even more dangerous. At 34 years old, Suarez needs to get going right now, and she's finally gotten the opportunity that she's wanted, and I think she comes through with it here. I think she's going to be too strong and too smothering in the grappling realm for Weili to have too much success here. Obviously, Weili will have a striking advantage. If she's successful in terms of keeping this fight standing, I think she can really pick apart Suarez and make this look very difficult for the challenger. But I think those moments will be few and far between. I think we'll see Suarez do a great job in terms of changing levels or even getting the cage clinch going. And from there, I think she'll be able to get to the hips, get to the ground, get to the back, or even just keep Weili on her back. I think if Suarez can wear on Weili, she will be able to break her down and eventually open up a submission opportunity for herself. I think within 3 rounds, we see Suarez snatch up the neck of Weili and eventually force the tap or put her to sleep out cold. And the other concern that we need to be worried about is Suarez 100%. We know she's been injury riddled throughout her career. If she even comes 80% of what she is at her best, I think she wins this matchup, and I think she ends up getting that submission victory. So give me Suarez to get that submission. I'm going to call it round 2, maybe round 3, but I think she wins the title and new women's strawweight champion, Tatiana Suarez. And that brings us to the final fight of the night, the main event, going down in the middleweight division as we have champion Dricus du Plessis coming in at minus 205, rematching the man he won the title from initially, Sean Strickland, who comes in at plus 175. Now, starting off on the du Plessis side, has looked pretty much unstoppable since joining the UFC ranks, winning the title against Sean Strickland in January of 2024. Split decision victory, very close fight. He comes out on top and then going out there and submitting former champion Israel Adesanya last year to get his hand raised and successfully earn that first title defense. Now, the big thing that a lot of people talk about when they bring up Dricus du Plessis is that he is the best, shittiest fighter in the world. And I think that rings true. You know, I think he might even admit it. Technically speaking, he's not all there. But his physicality, his explosiveness, his power, his ability to pull through in deep water has allowed him to come out on top against, 22 of his 24 opponents. It's hard to explain, right? When he first was coming in the UFC, a lot of people were shitting on him for his gas tank issues that he might have. But even when he is in deep water, he somehow finds a way to just dig deep and still produce either fight-ending moments or enough to get judges to score that round in his favor. He had a crazy streak of having every single one of his fights end inside the distance. Now, recently, he's been going to the scorecards a little bit more frequently, even though in the last 5 fights, he's only gone to scorecards once. Again, tremendous what he's been able to accomplish since coming to the UFC, and not even as a highly touted prospect. You know, mainly people knew him as the guy that handed Roberto Soldic a loss in KSW, which Soldic was able to avenge quickly thereafter. He's 31 years old, clearly in his prime, getting better each time out. And I think we can finally shut down the whole cardio issue that du Plessis may or may not have. He's shown time and time again that he can come through in deep water. Now, he goes up against Sean Strickland, who lost that close fight against du Plessis, like I said, last year, but managed to bounce back, I believe, in June with a 5-round victory over Paulo Costa. Now, again, similar to a fight that I talked about earlier on the podcast, the result really reads split decision. And it makes no sense as to how one of the judges actually scored that fight for Paulo Costa. Outside of the first round, I thought Sean Strickland did more than enough to win rounds 2 to 5, utilizing his classic style of just combination striking, weird forward movement, rolling with the big shots of his opponents, utilizing that teep kick up the middle to just slow his opponents down and annoy them, and then following up with combinations and just using a barrage of strikes to break them and start pulling away. Now, getting to the something else that not a lot of people touch on is his BJJ background as well. I don't believe he is a black belt. I believe at last I heard he was a brown belt. I don't think he cares as much about it anymore, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw shades of that in this matchup to try to make more of a convincing argument for him to win should this fight go to the scorecards. Now, talking about their first fight, I believe Strickland won round 1. I believe Strickland won round 5. But in the middle 3 rounds is where DDP seemed to do his best work. The third round was very close as well. But it seemed like the optics of du Plessis continually moving forward, landing those big shots, even if they weren't landing, just throwing those big shots and landing on the guard of Strickland was more optically pleasing for the judges. Hence why 2 of those judges scored those 3 rounds for du Plessis. Strickland had his moments, but should some of those moments have gone a different way, maybe Strickland is the one who is champion at this point in time. If Strickland can mix it up a little bit more, maybe get the clinch going, maybe get some takedowns, make it look a little bit more clear than having to just lean on his volume compared to the big power coming back his way, he can make this even closer and more convincing. So to see this line as wide as it is after seeing how competitive the first matchup was, makes me scratch my head. You know, Strickland absolutely has the chops. He has the durability. We know he has the striking defense to deal with that power punching style of du Plessis. So what if Strickland gets back to his classic style, moving forward, slowing du Plessis down, maybe throwing a little bit more output, working that teep kick to the body a little bit more to try to slow down du Plessis and take some sting off of his shots? I have to lean with Strickland in this spot. I just feel like he could get to his game and just frustrate du Plessis once again. And again, very close first fight. This should be closer to maybe a, minus 130, minus 140, maybe minus 150 at worst for the champion. But for some reason, we have him all the way up at minus 205. And thus, I have to go with the challenger here. So give me Sean Strickland. I think he wins this fight by decision. My tinfoil hat conspiracy, Strickland by sub plus 2,800. Maybe that's something that he looks to exploit later on in this matchup. Not bad, clearly worth a little bit of a sprinkle. But I think we'll see a classic Sean Strickland performance, walking Du Plessis down, getting to his game, and winning this fight on the scorecards. Make that add new ×2 middleweight champion Sean Strickland. There you guys go. All right, full card breakdown there for you guys. All 13 fights for this UFC 312 card. I'll be back tomorrow for the top 3 lock of the night candidates, as well as the chalk or not segment. So make sure you guys tune in for that. And then reminder, Thursday evening, I'll be dropping the 3rd episode of the Legacy Warriors podcast, talking about LFA 201, which goes down in Brazil. So stay tuned for that as well. All right, appreciate the love, appreciate the support. Did my best with the cadence. Hopefully it paid off. We'll see in the aftermath, and hopefully it's not too boring with me trying to talk a little bit slower, but trying to get better at that. Appreciate the love, appreciate the support. Drop a like, drop a comment, drop a subscribe, and let's hope for a better showing this week than we had this past weekend. Good luck this weekend, folks.